Well, this is where plasticity comes in. It is possible to change the brain, and you can set up alternate habits and rewire or create new networks. And that's where changing habits comes in.
I'm calling this out as a question that everyone truly is asking at the moment, which is how possible is it to shape your own habits? We can talk about New Year's resolutions, but just in general, I think people sort of come into the new year with feeling of like intention of wanting to do things the best that they can do. And there's a lot of, I don't know, pop psychology around about habit formation. So I wanted to go back to the science today. Yes, it's me. It's me that's asking the question. Hi, it's me. But it's everyone as well. So we're going to go with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first question is, what is a habit?
Yeah, because I think we've talked about nail biting before on What's That Rash, and I absolutely refer people to go back and listen to that episode on the podcast. But I think in January, the sorts of habits that people are often thinking about wanting to shape are less of a very simple habitual thing like putting their fingers in their mouth and more of a complicated thing like wanting to go running a couple of times a week.
Yeah. Now, I think the first thing to say is that habits merge into several different kinds of behaviors. But really what we're talking about is an automated response that sometimes we don't think about. We just do. And if
like opening the fridge at an open house.
Like opening the fridge, you see a fridge, you open it up. And what they talk about in terms of habits is context. So you're in the kitchen, you might be hungry, and then the cue is the fridge, and you open the door. And sometimes there's a reward for opening the door because there's yummy cheesecake in there or something like that. Sometimes there's no reward, but if you do it a lot, that gets reinforced. So
I'm just hungry now. So that's my context cue.
That's right. So, and if you read all the books, if you read any of the books, including some of the bestsellers on habits and breaking habits, it's all about context, the situation you're in, the cue, which could be the fridge, could be lots of other things, and the reward, which may be what you eat. But the reward is probably the least important part of habit formation. And if you come back to some of the other science in this area of behavioral economics, the work done by the late Dan Kahneman, for which he won the Nobel Prize, is that we have two ways of thinking about the world. One is that we have deliberate thinking, where we plan action, we're careful, we calculate, and so on, and circumspect. And then there's heuristic thinking, which is rapid thinking, rapid decision making. And we would not be able to survive as a species if every time we have to do an action, we've got to think about it.
Yeah, like you think about the number of decisions you're making as you just walk along a street. You're deciding not to step on an obstacle in your way, or you're kind of thinking about where you're going to go next. You're not thinking about the act of walking. Like, it's habitual in a really true sense.
Well, walking itself is a learned behavior, but and probably a natural behavior for human beings that unless there's something wrong, you will learn to walk. But where you walk, how you get to the shops each day, if you drive your car to work, the way you go to work is probably a habit. In other words, it's an automated response. I get into the car, I turn right, and I'm going to go that way. Now, if I used I know this because map on the phone, I might be able to have a faster way, but I'm damned if I'm going to do it because I'm going to go the way I always go.
Well, when I'm on my way to work, if I've got to drop my kids off at school, for example, I will forget to turn to the school because I'm just in the zone of going to work.
That's right. And so that's a habit too. It's an automated response that helps us get through life. And we don't think about these habits. The habits we think about are the habits we don't like or get us into strife. So, for example, it's me finding a cheesecake in the fridge and putting on too much weight, or opening the fridge in friends' houses when I shouldn't be doing that. And
it's a social problem.
Yeah, but it does merge into other behaviors too, which are a bit more dysfunctional. So a habit is not an obsessive compulsive disorder, but obsessive compulsive disorders do have habitual behaviors, such as going to check multiple times whether the door is locked or whether the tap has been turned off or whether the oven is still on. And those are kind of almost ritualistic behaviors, which could be described as habits, but they're actually more dysfunctional than that.
I do want to come back to that, but first, sort of thinking really big picture about the kinds of habits that people are often thinking about this time of year. There's obviously a market for this because the number of books that have been published that are about how to change your habits, the really big one that I think most people have heard about at the moment is Atomic Habits, which came out some years ago now, but like has really kind of found a place in the market. But there's lots and lots. Atomic Habits, The Power of Habit, Breaking the Habit, Daily Rituals, Tiny Habits. Did I already say that? High
Yeah.
Performance Habits.
Wasn't there one, Habits of a Good Leader, or some things like that?
Oh gosh, habit
past?
stacking. And there's a lot of, I think, desire for people to figure out ways of making virtuous behaviors automated, like what you were saying before. And really, I cannot claim to have read all of these books, but have done some reading around them. And what it seems to me is that there's actually a fairly similar core process at play in all of these books. That's really what you were saying before, this idea of context, cues, frequency, and rewards.
Yeah. And understanding those elements, and each one of those books deals with it. They might disguise it under different names or complexity to make it look as if they're giving you something fresh.
It's got to be at least 200 or 300 pages. Like, people feel shortchanged if it's not.
Well, that's right. And and effectively, most of these books are based on the science. So the context is the environment in which you might be susceptible to a trigger. The cue is seeing something, doing something, or being in a situation which actually triggers the habit, which could be opening the fridge or sitting down to a meal. And then it's frequency, how often you do it and how ingrained it becomes. And a lot of this comes from animal experiments, but also human experiments too. If you train an animal, you can create habits in animals, but the more you train them, the more you give them this routine, the more ingrained it becomes. And when I say ingrained, I mean ingrained in their brains and how nervous structures develop. And it's probably true in us as well. And
what's the animal, like, there's been heaps and heaps of rat and mouse studies about this. Like, what's the kind of
so, for example,
commonality?
There's a rat study, a series of rat studies where rats are encouraged to, just to be oversimplify the studies, they're encouraged to go to the left for a reward. So there's the context, they're in a certain environment, there's a cue for them to turn to the left, and then they might get a reward at that point. And if they do it often enough and they remove the reward, the context and the cue to turn left, they'll do it without the reward at the end, and they'll keep on doing it. Then they can try and break that habit, which is create a different cue or a similar cue, I would say, on the right-hand side and a reward on that side, and try and break the habit by pushing the rat towards the right. And the rat will then reliably go to the right. But if you actually stop doing that, the habit of going to the left will return.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's imprinted in the rat's brain, and it's presumably imprinted in our brains too. When you've done an action often enough with context, cue, and frequency, then that becomes hardwired, established in your brain, and it takes a lot of effort to break that.
That is so interesting. And so I do want to get to practical tips soon, but I think it'd be really interesting to understand the brain side of things, because there has actually been quite a lot of research here. What is happening in our actual brains?
Well, the key structures in the brain that are involved in this are called the basal ganglia. These are buried deep inside the brain, often towards the front of the brain. And basal ganglia are involved in lots of different things. They're involved in movement. They're involved in executive function, which means making decisions and planning. And they're also involved in learning. And they believe that things like Tourette syndrome is a problem where you've got this repetitive tic. That's a problem of the basal ganglia. Obsessive compulsive disorder, coming back to an earlier discussion we had, that's almost certainly a disorder of the basal ganglia. Parkinson's disease is where the basal ganglia are partly destroyed by the disease process, and that affects movement, but also habit formation. And so one of the problems with Parkinson's is that they lose automated behaviors, and sometimes they've got to relearn functional habits. So habit formation is almost certainly in the basal ganglia as well. So these are really important structures, and that's where it occurs. And networks are set up, and once you've got a neural network set up, it's hard to change it. So it changes in Parkinson's disease because the disease process disrupts it. But it's hard to change once you've done it, particularly if you've got habits that have formed earlier in life with high frequency cues.
What you could end up have happen then, though, is that you just feel like you're a victim of your own biology. Like if it's hardwired into your brain, what do you do about it?
Well, this is where plasticity comes in. It is possible to change the brain, and you can set up alternate habits and rewire or create new networks. And that's where changing habits comes in. So you can get rid of habits. The biological research would say that you can't get rid of the habit completely, and you can return to that habit, but you can create alternate pathways. And that's about saying, well, the core of this habit is context, the situation you're in, the cue, whether it's food or opening the fridge, and the frequency, how frequently you're reinforcing that in the brain. So let's say you want to eat more healthily when you open the fridge. So you're in the kitchen, you open the fridge. If you've only got vegetables there, then you eat vegetables when you open the fridge, or you sit down to a meal, whatever the context and cue might be. And therefore, the stimulus that you're getting is vegetables. That's the reward in a sense. And the frequency with which you get that reinforces the new habit, which is a healthier habit.
And that frequency is literally strengthening those neural pathways, which
That's right.
I think we could talk about that as if it's in an analogy, but it's literally like connections in the brain.
Yeah, and it means that if you want to get exercise, and the context is you're lying in bed, and the cue is the alarm clock going off, and
the reward is dragging yourself out of bed.
That's right. Every morning you get out of bed and you get your running gear on, or you go to the gym, or you go for a swim, or whatever the story might be, and you get a high from that. That's your reward. But if you do it every morning, then it starts to become a habit. It starts to become wired into your brain through these basal ganglia.
So I think, especially when we're looking at rat studies, the reward is often like literally sugar water, or we talk about in humans the dopamine hit of something that's instantly pleasurable.
That's going out for the exercise or what have you, yeah.
Yeah, but there's also in the research, especially in humans, of talking about the reward being something that aligns with your values. So if being healthy is important to you, then eating the vegetable in a sense is a reward because it's reinforcing what you are hoping to get for yourself. And so now I'd like to come to one of the things in pop psychology that I've heard a lot and have heard for years and years is about it takes X number of days to form a habit. And the number of days varies, but the idea that there's sort of like a set number of days to form a habit is really pervasive. And it can't possibly be true because this is just me like monologuing now, but surely quitting biting your fingernails versus getting into a rhythm where you've organised your running gear the night before and you've set your alarm and you've gotten up and you've gone out for a run, those are so different in terms of complexity. Surely they're different in terms of habit formation.
I think it's so variable in terms of how long it takes to create a habit. And then it does merge into the whole addiction story, which also happens in the basal ganglia. How much have you got to use a drug for you to become addicted to it? So it becomes a habit, then an addiction. And that's a controversial area. And you've got the pharmacology of the drug involved in that as well.
As well as the behaviours. So the number of days thing, I think it comes from about the 1960s. There was Dr. Maxwell Maltz, a great name, who was a cosmetic surgeon who found that it took a minimum of 21 days for patients to get used to their new features. So if they'd had plastic surgery or cosmetic surgery, it took that long for them to get used to the new features. And that kind of seems to be like the patient zero of that factoid. But in 2009, there was a really big study on habit creation that found that habits developed in a range of 18 to 254 days, which is a pretty big range.
So sometimes you've got to work pretty hard to create that habit, which means that it could be an unhealthy habit or a healthy habit.
Yeah, and the study that I'm talking to basically on average is around 66 days for something like incorporating eating a piece of fruit before a meal. So that is a relatively simple but kind of complicated. You've got to have shopped for it. You've got to be sort of thinking about it and then also eating the fruit. But yeah, even then, 66 days to really kind of lock in that new habit, which is 2 months, which is a bit more of a long game than I think a lot of people are expecting.
But it comes to this neuroplasticity thing, which is that if you've had a stroke, nobody would be surprised by a long-term prospect of stroke rehabilitation returning function. It's the same problem, which is dealing with brain plasticity, changing the way the brain is structured, and it taking a long time. If you learn a new instrument, the evidence is when you look at brain structure does change, but it changes over a fairly long period of time. So the idea that you can break a habit immediately is just false. You've got to work at it.
And I think that's a really nice way of thinking about it, because then you're not kind of beating yourself up about it if in February you're not there yet. Because I think we have this idea sort of sold to us through popular culture that it is going to be a relatively quick thing if you can just stick to it for 21 days or 6 weeks or whatever. But kind of knowing that it's happening in your brain, it is changing, you've just got to give it time and sticking to it, then that's really useful. So can we talk about...
And also, by the way, keep up the reinforcement. Because if you stop it, you could revert to the previous habit, which is still there wired in your brain, according to the animal studies.
Well, this is what I wanted to say. Like, can we talk about some practical tips for people who do want to start the year with some changes?
Yeah. So look at the so you've got a habit you want to change, and you've got to look at the situation in which that habit occurs, which is the context. You've got to look at what cues you to start that behavior. Is it the fridge? Is it the sight of food? Is it the alarm clock making you want to go back to sleep? What's the change of behavior? What might be the reward? And then doing it a lot, so that and just thinking that through, that you're building a new neural network, and that takes time and effort, and you've got to keep at it.
Like I said before, there are dozens, probably hundreds of books on this. There's podcasts, including this one. I mean, it sounds like a long-term thing, but it also sounds quite simple.
Yeah, and you haven't had to buy a book. Just have to subscribe to What's That Rash?
We got the job done for you in 15 minutes. 15 minutes to change a habit. That's what we should call this episode.
That's right. Context, Wednesday mornings when we drop. Cue.
Your podcast feed.
Yeah, your mobile phone and your iPod, your earpods, whatever you use to listen to your phone. And the reward is just being able to talk to your friends about the fantastic stuff we've told you all week, and then they become subscribers too. So this
Exactly.
is probably the best habit you could have in your life.
2025 New Year's resolution. What's that, Rash?
And one of the habits we've induced in our audience is feedback, and we get some fantastic feedback.
We have had some lovely feedback through the YouTube comment sections. Lulu Mayhem says...
Lulu Mayhem.
Lulu Mayhem. This is her username. It's probably not her
But
actual...
nobody writes to us on the YouTube channel with their real name. Have you noticed that?
Do I have to explain how usernames and handles work, Norman?
No, forget it.
Lulu Mayhem says, love that this is now on YouTube to watch. The question now is, will we ever get to see Dr. Swan's home setup with a towel on his head? I feel like we might need to explain this one to some newbies.
Yeah, that's right. So Lulu Mayhem was clearly a listener to CoronaCast.
You're one of the real ones, Lulu.
Coronavirus ones. And we, because we were on lockdown, a lot of the time we were doing it from home. And to make the room sound like a studio and stop reverberating, you had to put, well, I did.
You did.
A towel over my head. And the problem was, if it went on too long, I was suffocating and almost dying from lack of oxygen.
You also revealed to us at about 6 months in that you hadn't ever washed the towel.
Oh, it was revolting, yeah.
You're like, oh, this towel smells. I'm like, put it in the wash. Anyway, those are the pandemic days that we don't need to talk about anymore. There's other feedback that we've gotten. Some people saying that nobody puts their phone up to their ear anymore. So that's in reference to the 5G radiation chat that we had a few weeks ago.
The mobile phones cause cancer episode, yep.
So we were basically saying that if there was a link between mobile phones and cancer, what we would probably see would be an epidemic of brain cancer on people's dominant sides because they're holding their phone to their ear. People were saying, well, no one holds their phone to their ear anymore, so meh.
No, I think they do.
I think they do, but also, even if you're not holding it to your ear, we're still so like we're within an arm's reach of our phone almost constantly. We would still be seeing cancer rates going up across the board, and they're not.
Yeah, and for a while there was a theory, I don't think there was any evidence to it, that the earphones themselves were focusing the radiation even more than the phone. I don't think that's true, but that was one of the theories. But I think there's a sufficient number of people still using the phone to their ear that if there was an effect, we'd still see it.
And one person has said, "I'm so sorry that you're now exposed to the wonderful world of YouTube comments. I hope you have nerves of steel." Well, I have a cool trick. It's don't read the comments. Although I'm obviously reading some of them out now.
Yeah, we're reading them. It's overwhelmingly positive, which is a refreshing change from some of the other social channels.
So it's actually not us that has to read the comments on YouTube. It is our producer, Shelby. So send your thoughts and prayers to Shelby Trainer and send your questions to thatrash@abc.net.au.
And in fact, both will get to Shelby. And for those of you watching us on YouTube, this has been by way of an experiment. So we love your feedback on it. And this is the last YouTube for a while, and we might come back on again if the demand is there.
Yeah, if the demand is there.
Meantime, subscribe to What's That Rash if you haven't already on the ABC Listen app.